Hey everyone, this is Sachin Patel. Welcome to Perfect Practice. I am super excited today because I get to hang out with somebody I deeply admire, somebody who's been a massive influence on my life and continues to be a role model for many, many practitioners out there, for people who are really looking to take their health to the next level. Today with me, I have Sayer G. Sayer, thanks for being here today.
It's a great honor, Sachin. I love you. I love your work. You're probably the most influential philosopher of health and spirituality and well-being that I know because your quotes just rock my world constantly.
Thanks, man. That means a lot to me, and especially coming from you. I deeply receive that, and I appreciate you for acknowledging that. One of the things I will say about that is that I get that from my grandfather, so I do want to honor him. He's very good at putting things in very succinct ways, and it's almost like a fractal. A tiny equation can express so much information. So thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, we were just talking about fractals too, so I'm excited to throw you some questions during this live as well.
Sure, let's do it, man. So I'm thrilled because you've got a bunch of big things going on right now that are all related, and it's tied around your book launch and your masterclass launch of Regenerate. And this is really, really fascinating. So you've taken some very, amazing concepts, what might seem like obscure concepts to people, what might be very progressive concepts to people, but also tied in ancient wisdom, and you've brought it into this masterpiece. I was reading it this morning in preparation for this interview. I was reading it a few weeks ago when I was traveling to Hawaii, and it's amazing. It's so poetic. So I love the language that you use, the nomenclature that you use. It's an amazing read as a literary piece, but also as an informative piece. So the book title for everyone is called Regenerate: Unlocking Your Body's Radical Resilience Through the New Biology. Sarah, tell us, what is the new biology? Let's get into that first.
I love that you use the word poetic because poiesis means really to create, like hematopoiesis. And a lot of what the book looks at is what you might call the new biology, which is to demystify the term. It's just you and I right now and everyone listening. We have these miraculous vehicles, if you will, which doesn't even do what they are justice to say vehicle, but the reality is that, we have these incredible resilient cells, some of which are literally immortal. The germline cells specifically, which have been replicating a near infinite amount of times to get from the 3.4 billion years ago approximately that they emerged in terms of the last universal common ancestor cell, LUCA, which itself may have been deposited here through asteroids, through the panspermia hypothesis. It might have been some proto-fungal form, which we can talk about. And so when you start really diving deep into what the body is, there's no way to really differentiate it from mysticism, in terms of the just the awe and wonder of our body and its profound resilience, given the fact that when I wake up every day, Sachin, and I'm alive, somehow, knowing there's 100,000 synthetic toxicants that I'm exposed to daily and all this non-native EMF and you name it, we are relatively whole and well despite what should be a complete, devastating, obliterating assault on our being. And so it's sort of like a moment of gratitude every day I wake up and I realize I'm still alive and things are relatively still in place. And the book is sort of a dedication to that. It's a way of honoring this awareness, but also collating a lot of the research that, from what I understand, and you're such a great advocate and educator on this topic, there's probably a 40-year delay, honestly, between the research that has emerged that will eventually filter into medical textbooks and medical institutions, and then doctors' offices, and eventually the standard of care. I do think there's about a 40-year gap. So my attempt was to just create a shortcut, deliver this as soon as possible, to the people in a way that hopefully will make some sense.
Well, it certainly makes a lot of sense to me. And when you said the word, getting this into the medical system, it kind of brings up the word resilience for me. What do you think the resilience is in our traditional kind of conventional model? And this isn't to knock the model, but there's certainly something that's keeping this information from getting into the mainstream. What do you think that is?
So, I think that a while back when I was sort of more in my angry young man stage, and I was writing articles such as, is drug-based medicine a form of human sacrifice? Which actually etymologically it is, because you look at the word pharmaceutical, it comes from the word pharmacia, which is sorcerer, poisoner, and then you come up with the Greek word pharmakos, which means literally human sacrifice. It was done ritualistically and sometimes literally. So you look at even the root word of pharmacy, and you start to realize, wow, actually, several 100,000 people are being killed every year from correctly prescribed medications, and we're just sort of turning a blind eye as if this isn't happening, this virtual genocide on a biomedical level. And so, yeah, I think the failure is based on the need for the perpetual incurability of the body as a sort of infinite growth model for profitability. So there is that aspect to it. It's like, there's a new drug out for cancer, right? That is actually 4,000 times the cost of gold by weight. It's one of these monoclonal antibodies from some
Wow.
hybridized myeloma human animal thing. And they're claiming that somehow it's going to help people survive a few months, even though it has deadly side effects. And this is what they are offering as the solution to the most feared disease on the planet. So Regenerate goes a little deeper into even what is cancer and why is it that some people can undergo remission just through dietary lifestyle intervention. So, the resistance, I think, is based in part on ignorance. There's also institutionalized issues, whereas corporations have fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders. They have to make a profit. So when Goldman Sachs announces that, curing disease is a bad, non-sustainable business model, I mean, they're not joking. I mean, it's true. This system is really broken. And thanks to you, there are hybrid models, and there's integration, there's functional medicine, there's things that are coming together to try to heal the divide. So there is some hope.
My personal philosophy, and I can tell from this book that it's probably in alignment with your thoughts, is that really the doctor of the future is us, the patient, not the physician. And if we can put that power into people's hands, and really power is one thing, but belief is something else. So the conditioning that people have is that their body's broken, that something outside of them is going to fix them. And certainly there are elements outside of us that can fix us, which we'll get into today. But, just this belief that Mother Nature is making a mistake when our bodies really literally are the most resilient thing that we know. We've done everything up to this point and nothing's killed us. And this idea that people have that our body's trying to kill us, I remind people in my workshops that if your body wanted to kill you, it doesn't have to work so hard. It just has to stop breathing for 4 minutes. Let's get over that. Let's get over that idea that your body's trying to kill you and that it's doing everything it can to allow you to function at the best level you can with the resources, environment, the mindset, all the things that you're providing it with. And, once people kind of click and they see that and they hear it and they, take it in, then it really empowers them. And that's what I love about this book, because reading it, I just felt so electric, literally. We'll talk about that too. And I felt so empowered even further, because these are some things that I know, but as a researcher and somebody who's got the biggest online database of natural health research, you're in this, right? You're deep ingrained into this. And so the ideas that I have are being expressed, and now the science is emerging, and it's been around for a while. I mean, some of this stuff you were quoting was from the 1800s. So we've known about this for quite some time, but perhaps we didn't know the application of it. So tell me, like, just as a high level, what was one of the most eye-opening things for you writing this book and putting this masterclass together?
Well, the most eye-opening of all parts of the book was, so in many ways, Sachin, this book was a dark night of the soul for me. It took 3 years, and by the time I delivered it to Hay House, my publisher, it was twice the size. I didn't realize I had violated the contract agreement. I was like, well, more is the better. They're like, no, you got to cut this in half. So that was a very painful but necessary process for me to try to generate something a little more succinct. So when I actually really looked back at the process, I think it delivered me to chapter 3, which was, on the new biophysics, if you were, and like the esoteric physiology that is emerging as exoteric now, meaning, this is validated by basic principles in biology and physics and biochemistry, that our body is harnessing energy from sources beyond, the sort of the glucose-centric and fermentation, fat oxidation model, right, where the cell is basically, like a furnace and just burning food as energy, and that's where we get our energy. Rather, the body is harnessing energy from the sun. It's using melanin, for example, to dissociate the water molecule, freeing up high energy electrons and molecular hydrogen and oxygen. It's a completely different view of the body and its cellular bioenergetics. And then there is compelling evidence the body is pulling energy directly from the quantum vacuum, so-called zero-point energy. And this is something that is just happening constantly, explaining us on a subatomic, atomic, molecular, supramolecular level, the way things hold together. There is free energy being harnessed or navigated around, and it's really not being discussed anywhere else. So I was really amazed by some of the things I uncovered, and it took a little audacity to put it in this book. But I'm glad I did, and I feel more excited than ever to continue the learning process and share the little kernels that I find.
No, there was tons of nuggets, man. So I've got written down some questions. I want to have a cool organic conversation with you, but I want to make sure we highlight some of the things that were discussed particularly in that chapter. We could talk about the entire book, certainly, but I did want to focus on the energy synthesis, because more and more these days, people are struggling with low energy. In fact, besides a common cold, it's the number one reason people see their healthcare practitioner. And a lot of times they're kind of given they might run some labs on this person, and this person may not have anything quote unquote wrong with them. And, that might be true, right? I firmly believe that when somebody gets a normal lab result, well, hey, there's nothing wrong with your body. Maybe there's something wrong with the way you're using your body. So if you take your car to the mechanic and they don't find anything wrong with it, but you're a bad driver, you're not going to get the same performance and you're not going to get the same output from that car, and it's not going to last as long, but there's nothing wrong with the car. So, I love that the information in this chapter empowers people and gives them scientific evidence that there's more to energy than what your iron levels are and what your thyroid level is. There's so much more to it. And there's the things that we can do to address this are actually quite simple. So tell me, what is the current energy paradigm for those of us that maybe don't have any biology background? What is the current model of energy? And let's talk about how the new model, the emerging model, is going to be very different.
Well, so if you look at the primary viewpoints, that the mitochondria are the sort of energy centers of the cell, there's absolute truth to that. But if you go just a little bit deeper, let's say one scale down, and you acknowledge that all biomolecules have a hydration shell, and that for centuries we looked at biology through the lens of dehydration, of just looking at these structures that have no water involved other than as a bystander bulk water. The work of Jerry Pollack has helped us to understand that even in the inner mitochondrial membrane, there's water covering everything. And the water is a source of energy because it's taking ambient electromagnetic energy, which ultimately comes from the sun, and converting it into very structured lattice of hexagonal crystal-like sheets of H3O2, what is so-called fourth phase of water. And it works very much like a battery, stores energy and information, and it's powering much of what we believe or believed was really sourced from ATP production. So there's like a Newtonian billiard ball-like way of looking at energy. Mm-hmm. And one for this is, if you look at windmills, you can actually break apart the wood that comprises it and burn it, and that's energy. That's sort of more the way that the old view of the body is looking at energy production. But the actual wind that is almost a near limitless supply of energy, it's very much like what Tesla discussed, and in fact literally talked about, how the body was capable of hooking into this limitless field of energy. That's the interesting part, because so when you look at the mitochondrion, the inner mitochondrial membrane has electric field strength potential of 30 million volts per meter, which is a massive amount of energy. It's the same as discharged by a bolt of lightning. And that's one mitochondrion. In the neurons, what do we have? 5,000 mitochondria per neuron, and then you have billions of them. You do the math, and there's a near infinite amount of energy. Where's it coming from? Well, Richard Feynman, the famous American physicist, said there's enough energy in a cup of tea to boil off all the oceans into vapor, because that is the discovery, basically, of quantum electrodynamic field theory, is that we have access in any point in space and time to a near limitless amount of energy. The whole question was, is it transducible? Can you turn it into mechanical work? Well, you imagine if the body emerged as this miraculous, cellular structure from out of the void, that, yeah, it might be able to manifest some of that energy. I mean, people are like, well, you can't create something from nothing. Well, what is the Big Bang? It's a big nothing that turned into a big something. So when it comes to understanding where this energy comes from, I think it comes from places outside of just eating a hamburger and breaking it down and then burning it in these furnaces, right? So it's a new way of understanding energy.
Well, it's almost, in some regards, dangerous for people to receive this and recognize it. I mean, dangerous to the powers that be. Imagine people could really understand how powerful they are, that they have literally, billions and trillions of lightning bolts of energy stored in their body at any given time. I mean, imagine realizing and recognizing how to unlock that potential. It's pretty remarkable, man. My mind was blown. Just the numbers, the exponents and all that stuff. I mean, we would have to relearn our math.
Yes.
That's the other thing, is it would require a complete revamping of our mathematical teachings, because we learn kind of Newtonian math, and as we were talking about earlier today, the math of the universe is not necessarily Newtonian, right? There's other math that we need to explain some of this phenomenon.
Absolutely. Several things come to mind. I mean, Nassim Haramein has really gone to the edge with his view of the proton as a black hole, and trying to understand the energy density of the universe through just understanding how, a proton functions. And I think he has this whole holofractal view of the universe that we've been talking about. But, when you think about even this documentary, Lightning Bolt, it's about the electrical view of the universe. Like the sun. Is the sun like some kind of like nuclear reaction, or is it in a way just transducing, like almost receiving, like one of those Tesla coils, all this massive energy? And in fact, according to Nassim and others, the sun may be a sonoluminescent based phenomenon, and that it is a white hole around a black hole. And sunspots are literally when you get to see the black hole. So when we start to really open our eyes to even astrophysics in a different lens, yes, this book, Trojan Horse, is in a very revolutionary concept, and it got me super excited, because when we start getting into this, we have to look at water cavitation, which I just recently found a paper that shows that microsonation events happen within the cell membrane. It's mainly looked at destructively, but what that means is that water will naturally, like in a mechanical system, like say the propellers on a boat, produce these exotic steam bubbles. They're called water cavitation bubbles. And they basically are spherical vortexes. They implode upon themselves and produce temperatures that are, again, similar to what's found on the surface of the sun, and produces light. You can produce a star in a jar phenomenon using an acoustical wave or laser. And literally, it's like a sun. And some theorize that there are millions of degrees of temperature in the core of it. This is another example of transduction of that near infinite amount of energy in the quantum vacuum. Well, there are creatures that actually access this phenomenon. The mantis shrimp and the pistol shrimp strike their claw and induce water cavitation to kill their prey. Or they can break aquarium glass. They can split a diver's thumb. it's like that Buddha palm karate move. They're producing the temperatures again that are similar to the surface of the sun. So there's another example of a creature as diminutive as a shrimp, more than just accessing some of the energy. They're creating what is essentially like a stellar nucleosynthesis event. Like they're literally producing a star-like event in water. And so
Wow.
it's, yeah.
So calling somebody a shrimp is not an insult anymore.
It's a compliment.
Yeah, there you go. We lightly touched on 0 point energy. So for somebody who's new to that concept, can you describe what that is?
Well, it's basically different than every other way that we produce energy in the old paradigm, which is largely based on fossil fuel, where you can't get more energy in to these machines than energy out than you put in. It's called over unity when you produce more energy than you're actually putting in, because in the old way of viewing things, that violates basic laws of conservation of energy and matter, and you can't do it. But in biological systems and in cold fusion experiments, for example, Fleischmann-Pons did this famous experiment where they were able to produce much more energy in these reactions than were put in. This is a new paradigm, because if you have devices that don't require fossil fuel and this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure, and that it can be accessed cleanly, affordably, an infinite source of energy, then it would disrupt the entire global paradigm in many ways. I mean, the whole system is predicated on things like the petrodollar, exchanging fiat fake paper money for oil to give that dollar value, and drives the entire system. Endless war and all the different geopolitical fighting over limited resources. Well, this is why this is such a controversial topic. But I think the fact that it's emerging in basic biology and seems completely validated is exciting.
That's pretty amazing. The 4 phases of water, that's probably new to people as well. And I know I learned about it a couple of years ago, and it kind of blew my mind. It helped explain a little bit differently about how the heart works and how we get blood to, through our capillaries and stuff like that, and how the sun, charges this battery. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's really easy to understand insofar as, we have 100,000 miles of blood vessels. And so the old biological paradigm said that it's just being, several liters of blood is just being pushed through with this pump called the heart. The heart has maybe 7 seconds of ATP, and, the billet balls stack correctly, maybe because you ate the right food in the morning, and, you're able to push it through this pretty much infinite amount of tubing. So you can't accomplish that with any known biomechanical process with a pump that, has ever been looked at. So it's literally the water that is charged up through the ambient EMF in the environment, and it's creating the equivalent of a molecular battery. So it's basically, okay, so the EZ layer of water that coats the hydrophilic surfaces is a negative charge, and then right alongside is a positive charge. And that's what creates this, separation of charge. It's basically a battery. I went to Jerry Pollack's lab and in Seattle, and one of his postdocs had some cells filled with water and then an LED light running off of it in the lab. Then he had a desalination device, same thing, no power, just a bunch of little Teflon tubes with decreasing diameter that was just excluding out all the solutes. And so it's amazing what this technology already does. Talk about free energy. It's already available with just water and some plastic tubing, or you just look at your body. It's doing it all the time.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about, the sun, and, you also talked about chlorophyll and how chlorophyll interfaces with the sun to create energy. And that denotes the importance of eating plant-based foods. And you also mentioned that kind of in this movement for a more Paleolithic type of diet, that vegetables, especially green vegetables, leafy vegetables, are likely underemphasized. And I think if people could understand the importance of chlorophyll, which is essentially very similar to our own hemoglobin, then people could understand the importance of eating, particularly green leafy vegetables. So let's talk about that a little bit, because certainly if all we do is get somebody to eat an extra salad a week, we've moved them in the right direction. But if we can get them to eat more greens every single day and understand that there's an interface between that molecule in greens and the sun, and the interaction creates better health in our body, I think it would really drive the message home.
Yeah, that was one of the eureka moments for me. It was in 2013, I believe was the date. There was a study published that looked at the effect that chlorophyll had in the diet of pigs and other animals. And what they found, and pigs, by the way, are about as close to humans physiologically as any animal I could think of, is that the chlorophyll metabolite, PBE, was being pulled into mitochondria and was enabling those energy centers to harvest sunlight and speed up the production and efficiency of ATP, while simultaneously reducing reactive oxygen species production. And it had a significant effect, like it was something like up to 29-fold increase in ATP production. Now again, ATP to me is part of the old billiard ball model, but it's a good surrogate for understanding what else is going right within the energy centers. So, and interestingly, some believe now, like Arturo Herrera, I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's a Mexican researcher that has come up with this amazing understanding of melanin. And he believes that basically ATP production and sort of glucose burning is really more about biomass than it is about energy. You know, that we're producing, like even when you see fermentation, right, in cancer, it's really about producing more biomass. The Warburg effect may have more to do with that than actual energy for the cancer cell, production of biomass. So needless to say, the billiard ball model still seems to be helpful in understanding how chlorophyll is basically giving our body the ability to be plant-like. So we're now within what is known as a photoheterotroph category. Photoheterotroph. So unlike the old view, which is we're just heterotrophs, we have to eat other things or we die, and plants who are autotrophs who just suck in sunlight, we're photoheterotrophic in between. There's only a few other examples we know, classically, like these green aphids that borrowed a carotenoid biosynthetic pathway from a plant and is like green and is taking in the sunlight. Well, humans have this faculty now, and it's really profound because, you know, it helps us to better understand why consuming chlorophyll-rich food is so important. But there's many layers to this, Sachin. One of them is that ATP magnesium chelate, chlorophyll is green because there's magnesium atom at the center versus iron for hemoglobin, is apparently part of what functions like a nanocyclotron within the mitochondrion. Because this researcher from the Army in the 70s, Samuel Goldfein, did a study looking at how the mitochondrion might transform elements into one another, as well as produce this over-unity effect. And his discoveries confirmed it was at least 7 ways that the mitochondrion work exactly like a cyclotron particle accelerator, which is enabling it through the helical formation of magnesium ATP to accelerate protons to near the speed of light, and then creating, basically transforming the light into programmable matter. So this was an incredible study that I referenced in the book. I encourage everyone to read it because it just blows my mind.
Wow. You know, when I was reading this chapter, it kind of reminded me of the autobiography of a yogi. I don't know if you've read that book, where he basically calls matter into existence, and he's able to, you know, do things that at the time, at least when I was reading it, we would have thought were impossible, kind of based on our Newtonian mathematical model. But now that we're starting to realize that we can convert, you know, energy into matter, and our bodies are already doing that, you know, it's evidence that that's even possible. So, you know, that was what was going through my head. I was like, wow, this is like really powerful. It is actually possible for us to do that.
Yes, in fact, this gets to the research of Mark LeClaire, which again, I have the honor of including in my book. So it's so funny because this is so Trojan horsed and not really relevant technically to regeneration directly, but I had to put it in because his discovery as a nanotechnologist who's worked with Lockheed Martin and all these companies was that he could induce a water cavitation event that generated a stellar nucleosynthesis event. Just like we talked with sonoluminescence or the pistol shrimp, you can induce in water a cavitation bubble that will generate heat that is like what's found in the sun. So the old model view was that all the elements of the earth and in our bodies is stardust. Well, his experiment showed that he was able to generate the entire periodic chart of elements through water cavitation. And when he looked and evaluated the ratios of these elements, it matched almost completely the ratio of elements found on the surface of the earth.
Wow.
So, yes. I mean, how did this all happen? How is there so much water on the planet? How did these elements appear? It wasn't just because meteors depositing water and because of, elements coming from extraterrestrially. I mean, this is a whole new explanation for life, and it's profound. So when you talk about manifestation of elements, when we're water, why are some yogis burned, right? And there's this lore around how their bones have gems in them. There's just gems left. Like, we start to better understand how this is even possible in the human body. There's ultrasound wavelengths emitted by the human voice, even when we whisper. Those ultrasound wavelengths, now that we know you can induce microsonation within cell membranes, could theoretically induce cavitation in a beneficial way in the human body. I mean, this is next level hypothesis, but it starts to make sense, actually.
Well, our words become our world, right? And, by saying something to somebody like "I love you" or whispering in their ear that they're healing, that they're cared for, I'm pretty much certain that that's going to have an impact. Now, whether it's this exact mechanism that's taking place, sometimes we don't need to know that. We just need to know that it works. And, I love how you're adding the scientific aspects of this so that it's not so esoteric, right? Because this is hard, peer-reviewed research that's reproducible, that's giving us this amazing, perspective on health. And I love how this is really bringing in a lot of validating a lot of ancient wisdom.
Mm-hmm. Even when you say that, my colleague John Stuart Reid invented the cymoscope, which is a device that uses a water membrane that transforms sound into visual data. It's all those beautiful mandala patterns that you see.
Yep.
He helped me understand, and we've written about this on Greenman Info, that sound through the voice is comprised of phonons, which actually turn into photons. So literally when you speak, some of that is turning into light that's traveling to the other side of the universe. And with quantum entanglement, you don't even need that Newtonian delay, and it's already happening. So physics literally explains how we can connect and heal, and words can kill and they can heal. But imagine, the science is so powerful that it's affirming this.
Well, as complex as some of these topics might be, the application of them are actually really simple. And so we're kind of studying nature's complexity, but we're able to apply this immediately and highly effectively in very simple and essentially free ways, right? It doesn't cost you any money to say something nice to your spouse or a loved one, or even a stranger. Even if they've wronged you, you can create these phonons and in a sense photons. So it's pretty cool how we're just emanating so much energy and creating whatever world we want, essentially.
Well, there's this differentiation, I would say, between language as representational, right? There's a sign and a signified, and it's all about meaning. And then there's the almost mythopoetic, a logopoetic component, which is that words create and destroy. And that's, I think, we're coming to understand this on a scientific level. Exactly what you're saying is we wield such great power over our own destinies. And when we think or say things, our cells are eavesdropping. It's our cells actually saying them, emitting these frequencies. So yeah, it's pretty amazing when you get deeper into the new biology and physics. It's almost synesthetic. You're like, wait, is this a psychedelic experience I'm having? Oh no, it's just life, the way it should be.
One thing you also talk about is melanin. And, that's, of course, what gives our skin its color and pigmentation. And there's, socioeconomic implications that you briefly discussed in the book, but more importantly, there's energetic implications of melanin. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Melanin. I love talking about melanin. I was so obsessed with this, Sachin, that my wife, Kelly Brogan, was so annoyed when I bring it up. I was like, created a whole base camp group of melanin, discussion, and it didn't go anywhere. But I mean, melanin is incredible, right? It absorbs the entire electromagnetic spectrum, right? From radio waves to gamma waves. And it is found within all tissues of the human body, especially the brain, actually. You think about Parkinson's disease and the depigmentation of the substantia nigra. It turns out, by the way, melanin is a byproduct of tyrosine, as is dopamine, is that the melanin also is a powerful chelator of toxicity, and it will pull in all kinds of pesticides and metals, etc. So over time, there's probably an autoimmune reaction where it reaches a certain toxicant load and the body starts destroying those cells. But the cells exist deep in the brain that produce melanin, probably for this reason. And this is, again, Arturo Herrera's work, is that melanin is amazing insofar as it enables the equivalent of human photosynthesis. So photosynthesis involves photolysis, or splitting of the water molecule to produce high energy electrons and, again, molecular oxygen and hydrogen. Well, according to his research, which I think is highly compelling, that's exactly what's going on in the brain and other structures. In fact, he discovered this to try to find a solution to blindness, to figure out what was causing it. Because he found that there were no capillaries to the retina, but there was highly melanized regions. So how is oxygen and energy being delivered to that extremely important part of the body? It was through melanin disassociating H2O, again, producing the oxygen that's needed that otherwise would have been delivered by blood vessels, as well as the profound energy. Here's the best example. The painted turtle. How can you put this sucker in room temperature water for 48 hours without oxygen? It doesn't die. But how about you go and look at what it does in hibernation? It'll stay for 3-4 months underwater without oxygen. It's getting its oxygen. It's getting it because it's disassociating the water molecule. And that's what's giving it energy. It's not ATP. It would die from lactic acidosis within a matter of probably days or sooner. So melanin is this amazing energy generation device. And according to Arturo Herrera, it actually reforms water as well. So we can take gas, hydrogen, and oxygen and put it together. So it is this, and he even believes that it's the basis for almost a 1-0 information center, because it can switch on from forming to dissociating water. So let's just say that this is powerful because, okay, recently a paper came out about 2 million years ago when the encephalization event happened. I mean, this is a powerful thing, guys. Anyone who's born knows that it's a near-death experience because our brains are so big you can barely make it through the birth canal. That's why childbirth is like shamanism, right? And it's incredible, right? It's a near-death experience for everyone involved, except for the men, maybe. But needless to say, there's so many theories as to why this is true. I mean, there's endogenous retroviruses involved. There's switching to high-fat, animal products in the paleo movement. There's hairlessness. That's the primary explanation, according to this researcher. And the theory is that the removal of hair enabled us to access, through photobiomodulation, more energy from the sun, and melanin became more exposed to that sunlight, and enabled deep melanization. The original humans were probably very dark skinned. And so there's just so many things about melanin that is scratching the surface of this that will blow your mind. But I will say that I understand it to be one of the most protective and important of all molecules. And thankfully, it's found throughout nature in the form of biomelanin, from chaga to kidney beans to many foods that are dark, actually confer their advantages to us when we consume them.
So you say kidney beans and chaga. Anything else that comes to mind?
There are many examples of biomelanin. I think I even have a section on Greenman Info, but it's okay. There's 3 different types of melanin, right? There's phoamelanin, which is what like redheads have. There's eumelanin, which is most of the brown dark melanins, and you have neuromelanin, in the brain. But you have many plants. Like look at seeds. There's a great example that Herrera brings up. Look at dragon fruit seeds. Why are they so deeply melanized? And what is a seed? It's the potential for infinite, a biomass. One seed could produce a forest. And so this is a part of how it gets energy. And why are the nucleosomes on the nucleus, these melanin granules? Because the nucleus doesn't have ATP, doesn't have mitochondria. Where's it getting all its immense energy that it's needed? It's getting it from melanin, providing that molecular hydrogen as well as electrons, etc. It's just such a great, elegant explanation for where the cell gets its energy.
How would people explain it otherwise? Like, what's the current understanding of where the nucleus gets the energy from?
Actually, I don't think there is a current understanding. That's what's profound about this explanation. Is like in some basic biology is so basic, like to the point where it requires, I think, a profound dumbing down. It's just rote. This does that, this structures this. There's no understanding of the electrical nature of the cell. The fact that the biomass is almost like an epiphenomena, whereas we're primarily electromagnetic entities. Like that's the inversion that's happening. There's someone who coined the term electrosome to describe all the EMF emitted by the cell, but emitted isn't the right term. It's as if the frequency is primary, like the ontology of Vedic thinkers, where it's like integuments of an onion. Like what in the West we think is the most real is this meat carcass, the lowest vibration, and the subtler energies are what actually is at the core of what life is, what we are. It's why those who go through plant medicine or near-death experiences or childbirth, they will experience themselves as nothing but a field of infinite energy. And this is what the quantum vacuum is. It's ether, it's prana, it's shakti. It's there's so many words for it. So I like to remind people that if we're really trying to understand what we are, bios, actually we're going to probably have to go pretty mystical, because as you were saying earlier, the fractal reality is infinitely scalable, or you can go down to infinitesimal layers. So what is life? What are we really if we don't account for the ground state, which is itself infinite? It's fractal. So it sounds mystical, but it's not. It's just sort of obvious.
Yeah, it seems like the yogis and the monks are tuned in and tapped into this for sure. In the book, you talked about the paleo lifestyle deficiency. You want to talk about that term a little bit and explain what that is?
Yeah, I think that the term Anthropocene is so powerful, to describe our present era of basically humans taking over the biosphere and in some ways irreversibly altering it. But although I've started to revise my view on irreversibility, I think it is reversible. But let's just say that previous to the 1860s, but going back much longer, but 1860s is really the birth of the global industrial revolution. That's when everything pretty much went wrong, in my opinion. Now, people were still technically eating organic then because they didn't have an alternative. But let's just say that when petrochemicals started to enter into human experience, to me, was the beginning of the end of something really important. And the paleo deficiency concept speaks to not just the change in food, right, from the ancestral template to now, the advent of grains. I mean, we can really look at that as 5,000 years BC en masse, with the Fertile Crescent. But it's let's just say that it also involves things like certain compounds produced by plants in the forest that we need to smell in order to regulate our entire autonomic nervous system. Certain movement practices or exposure to grounding through bare feet, or getting the whole spectrum of sun emissions, especially dawn and dusk. Those two periods with those infrared in red is really important. So discussing it as a deficiency helps to, I think, foreground the essentiality of us getting back to these practices.
Yeah, I think a lot of people associate the word paleo to a diet, and it's really a lifestyle. So I think that's important for people to differentiate. You could be eating what you might consider a Paleolithic diet, but if you're sitting in front of your computer indoors, not seeing the sunrise or sunset because your days are long or days are short. Your days are long at work, but short in terms of your free time, then there's implications of that. And I think it's important that people kind of go back to the basics. That's one of the things that we try to teach the people that we work with, is that it's so simple, and that's what's not so sexy about it. That's also what's sexy about it, is that the sophistication of this amazing world we live in, this amazing universe we live in, takes care of a lot of this magic for us, right? And it's pretty cool when you start realizing how simple it can be and how far removed we are from that simplicity, because our conventional models really, in my opinion, try to match the complexity of the body. And as we're starting to learn, that complexity is actually sophistication, which allows us to be healthy in a very simple way.
Yes. I love that, because the word simple means one-fold, universe, similar, like one song. But there's something so healing in that. Like, it's why I advocate for people to try the just apple mono diet for a day. Is just eat organic apples and just eat one when you're hungry. If you're really not hungry, you're not going to want to eat another apple. And just what it saves you in terms of your thinking and preparation and cleaning and with food is just tremendous. And that is what's healing. It's not so much the apple per se, although we could dive deep into why apples are the most perfect food in ways. It's actually a toroidal vortex as well. It's like, it's really literally incredible sacred geometry in the apple itself. But yeah, I totally agree with you.
Well, let's do that. Let's talk about apples. How about we go down that rabbit hole?
I like it. Yeah, well, apples. Okay, one thing I love too about the discussion about chlorophyll is okay. Take a green apple if you like, but there are these things called meristematic cells, and there are 2 or 3 categories really. There's the root apical meristem, from which all the roots come from plants, and then the shoot apical meristem, from which all the other shoots and flowers and organs come from. And then you have the ones that are quasi-meristematic, which means quasi-immortal, basically, in the flesh of all these fruits that we eat, for example. But these cells are, I feel, transducers of this quantum energy and information. In the book cover, you see, we love this book cover because look at the meristematic cell at the top of the curd of this incredible, like, trippy thing called a Romanesco cauliflower. But it's literally doing this 24/7, practically forever. It's producing this biomass out of nowhere from this one group of small quiescent basic stem cells at the tip. And you can take these plants, like there's Lomatia tasmanica in Tasmania that's 46,000 years old. It's been clonally propagating for 46,000 years.
Wow.
Right? Because these meristematic cells have access to what is apparently near perfect, if not perfect, information and energy, which is transforming into biomass. When I say that, I mean, like, look at an air plant. Is it just pulling up dust and vapor to produce its form? I think it's a pretty good example of manifesting from the void, right? So an apple has some of these amazing cells, which I feel confer profound longevity. I feel like the raw food diet in certain contexts and applications can remit, fatal chronic disease because of not just the enzyme activity and content, but it has also some of that vital energy, which, you can take Carolean photography, it gives you a little glimpse, but I don't really think we necessarily have the instrumentation to properly quantify this qualitative aspect of, sort of energy that it can provide the human body. So apples, oh my Lord, I'm just talking about the more mystical component, but you look at Chernobyl, it was the pectin in apples that saved the lives of tens of thousands of children, the most susceptible, because they keel out radioisotopes among other highly toxic compounds in the body due to the pectin. Then you have the perfect example of, an object that has this structured water, biological water, if you will, dissolved oxygen, and then these incredible polyphenols that are known to do things like prevent the oxidation of LDL, to prevent the atherogenicity of ox-LDL. We could go on and on because there's so many components. The seed itself has natural cyanide. which in some applications could be considered an alternative to conventional chemotherapy, like apricot seeds, which is why the FDA made them pretty much illegal to use. There's so many aspects to the apple. The microbiome of the apple alone confers such profound rejuvenative qualities. So in the Agreement Info, we have tons of studies validating apple for dozens of diseases. So, there's a lot there with apples.
So the apple a day keeps the doctor away is there's a lot of truth to that.
Or based on what I said initially, it won't keep ET away, but it might keep the doctor away.
Is there a particular apple that you prefer?
Well, I love organic, obviously, for reasons that, people may not realize this, but lipophilic toxicants, pesticides are used, which can go penetrate systemically into the fruit. So people think, oh, I'll just buy conventional and peel, and that goes beyond other aspects, which we didn't even talk about yet, which is the apple is the perfect food. And you've even discussed this, Sachin, you said so next level with food as software or fruit as software. And this is a basic premise of the book, which is that angiosperm and flowering fruit-bearing plants, which are subtending 70% of the world's food supply still, and complex animal life, metazoa, they've been co-evolving for at least 200 years and have woven their genetic, epigenetic destinies into one another in a way where now, without fruits, our reproductive and endocrine systems simply don't function as designed. And so that's why consuming the ovaries of these fruiting plants, could be pomegranate, could be plum, orange, will literally support and in some cases in the animal model replace the function of the mammalian ovary. And in the case of pomegranate, it has bioidentical steroidal hormones like estrogen and testosterone. So you even see that they've developed the very thing those animals need to live longer and prosper. And why is that? Because we're dispersing their seeds for them. And then, of course, they would love for us to be healthy and reproduce as well. It's a perfect handshake or hug between the animal and plant kingdoms. And how's it happening? MicroRNAs. Probably on some level the most technical and boring part of the book, but yet in a way the most revolutionary, which is that we've discovered that there are these little virus-sized particles called exosomes in all the foods we eat that contain master regulator nucleic acids called microRNAs. And these microRNAs are now known to be responsible for the complexity of animal species. So why do humans and earthworms have the same amount of protein coding genes? Because the protein coding genes do not have the answer to why we are human or complex. But microRNAs are a closer approximation because we have far more RNAs that are transcribed in our genome, the 98% that they call junk. And those microRNAs supervene upon, orchestrate the expression of the protein coding genes. So now you have 23,000 or 20,000 keys on a piano, and you can produce infinite variations. Well, the microRNAs are part of that symphony and orchestra. And so contain the microRNAs because we outsource the regulation of aspects of our genome to the foods we consume. So now suddenly foods become the most important aspect of health on that biomedical layer, that no drug on the planet could ever reproduce the infinite selectivity, intelligence, safety of food for doing all the wonderful things we know it can do for healing.
I love that. And I love how you explain it so poetically. I wish my biology teacher was this, fluent in the language. It's awesome. Where I'm going to ask you a personal question. Where does this come from? So where did all this passion and drive and all of this come from?
That's a good question. Oh, you know what? Before I got even into natural health, I was still basically a teacher counselor for troubled children, Princeton Blairstown Center. I remember going through my own healing journey, because that's my story. I mean, from six months of age onward, I was a sick kid. And I remember eating this apple and almost feeling like it was singing to me and talking to me. And, conventionally, the psychiatrists would love hearing this. They'd like to lock me up, acre-actomy, whatever. But the reality is that I was hearing it say, eat my delicious body, but don't eat the seeds because they want to be passed on. And I was like, wow, that kind of makes sense to me. And then only years later did I actually realize that evolutionary biology was affirming this, and the xenohormetic hypothesis, which is that plants produce a lot of these polyphenols and other phytocompounds as secondary plant metabolites, not just, for biological reasons, but as informational molecules to communicate to the other species on the planet what might be impending droughts, or to convert certain longevity pathways to those plants, because destinies are merged. And this is one of the interesting things. I believe there's a new ontoethics, if you will, emerging based on the new biology, where words like compassion mean to suffer with. I was astounded, Sachin. I spent 8 months of my life indexing all the research on turmeric, and I found that it was studied to have benefit in over 800 human diseases, which is like 1/3 of all the diseases I've categorized. And I'm like, how is this possible? One plant could really be a panacea for all those conditions. It's absurd. It sounds like snake oil. And I realized that in the Vedic tradition, turmeric was considered like a goddess, and it's shown this bright, compassionate, healing light. So I realized, wow, it makes so much sense, because if we die, this plant, which a lot of plants like this exist now, they only exist through human propagation, certain plants. And because now, so when one hurts, the other feels the pain, and vice versa, and compassion may be looked upon in this way. Now, microRNAs provide the missing link because they are cross-kingdom messengers of essential biological information. So this concept of this hermetically sealed, one-way direction of information within the nucleus is completely obliterated, and that we're in an open network. It's like the blockchain or something, or there's this horizontal information flow constantly, this dialogue, and it helps explain why a walnut looks just like a brain of a mammal and feeds it, right? Like all these amazing doctrine of similarities between plants and why they heal certain parts of the body is and the Gaia hypothesis. There is a meta-intelligence, and now we understand the mechanism. When we eat plants and we excrete, the remnants, those microRNAs are taken up by their roots, and they get information from us on how to produce a better fruit for us the next year, theoretically, and vice versa. It's just amazing.
I love it. So what is your hope for people who read the book, go through the masterclass? What is it that you'd like to accomplish by putting this amazing, epic, project together? It's really your life's work. What would you love to happen?
I think I would just love for them to have a felt sense of what's possible, that they can heal fully. A good portion of the book is actually discussing what you pointed out, which is so profound about belief. The psychogenicity of the human soul. I believe humans have such a power that if they could self-combust, there's even examples apparently of people sitting in a room combusting, that if we start to understand how much power we've given to others, in this case it's the men in the white coats now, but it could have been a shaman thousands of years ago, and start realizing that we have this power, we give it to others. That's why the placebo and nocebo have so much power. But it won't in the future, because we can own the fact that we have this amazing power to self-manifest health or disease. And I see now how the new biology is confirming that in a very significant way. So I want people to know that they can heal anything, from the most feared diseases of all time, cancer, heart disease. That's why I cover that in depth in my book. And that their birthright is resilience and longevity and a feeling of well-being. I really want people to move beyond, health just as this perfect bodily state to one of a felt connection and joy in being alive. Because I feel what will heal the planet, Sachin, is when people truly fall in love with themselves, the earth, life. That is what's going to end war. That's what's going to end torture and all the things that are happening. It's not because they have a better ethics in their mind or more knowledge. It's because they need to feel their birthright, which is, of course, love and joy and harmony and connection.
It's one of the things that we love to tell our clients and everyone that's tuning into this is we've got to love ourselves to life. You know, most of us love ourselves or we love our kids to death, and it shows. But if we start loving ourselves to life, it's a different energy, different vocabulary that we're bringing to the table. And I feel like this is really, you know, what you've done is really validated how a lot of us might think or feel, or maybe weren't able to describe it, put it into words. You've poetically and so elegantly put it into words for us. I'm excited for your book. Tell us a little bit more about that so that we can all grab our own copies, and then we'll talk about the masterclass as well.
Thank you. So the book, you can actually get a free intro and chapter and introduction on theregenerateproject.com. And the book comes out March 31st. Encouraging people to connect with indiebound.com because the independent booksellers are being crushed by the Amazons of the world. And to go ahead and reach out to your local bookseller. There's one locally here in Miami called Books and Books. I'm thinking about just going and doing a sort of a book release at, because it's just small, lovely, and beautiful. And it's the way that, you know, we want to support our local, you know, book people. And then, yeah, so I'm excited about that. But it's, to me, like, again, the book delivered me to this place where I'm super excited. I have spent 3 years postponing, researching, and writing about all these topics that I'm so excited about. And doing this podcast with you is such a joy. I love your work. I can't wait to interview you. So,
thank you.
Yes. So that's, you know, the book is just I can just rest. I dig Green info. It's still going to go strong, but now I can enjoy life and really get people inspired the way I want to be inspired.
Amazing. Tell us about the masterclass you've put together as well.
Yeah, so the masterclass is trying my best to do the same thing, like in this talk, is to inspire, not just overload people with massive information. I mean, the talks are between 18 minutes and half an hour. And just 7 days of taking some key points and trying to just kind of disperse it into the universe and hope that it inspires people and, you know, gets them thinking differently about the control they have over their health destiny.
Well, knowing what we know now after this conversation, we are doing that already. Just by speaking about it, by putting it in our hearts, putting it in our minds, spreading the information, it's already happening, brother. I love it. I love you. I love everything that you're doing. So glad that we can support each other and, you know, see this mission and vision grow, because we all want what's best for this planet. We want what's best for its people. And I can see that starting to manifest as people like yourself, you know, take this information, make it accessible to anybody and everybody, and share with an open heart. It's beautiful to see, and it's beautiful to be part of.
Thank you so much. And I would say that anyone that already knows of my work, they should be following you. And I really hope that they do that, because I know you're doing incredible things out there. And, you know, I have so much to learn from you. And I'm just so excited that we're on this journey together.
Thanks, my brother. So I'll share these links in our show notes so everyone can get access to it. I've already been tuned into the masterclass. And like you said, it's very, very succinct. It's very powerful information, and it's easily applicable. So congratulations again. And I look forward to your continued growth and success, and to continue to support you, my man.
Thanks so much, Sachin. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you. Bye for now.